Tonight, massacre at Fort Hood. The suspect's now able to sit up and talk as troubling questions emerge about his relationship with a radical Muslim cleric and a possible link to some of the 9/11 hijackers. I'm Katie Couric. Also tonight, President Obama's big decision on Afghanistan. David Martin with the exclusive details of what the military will be getting to continue the fight against the Taliban. A CBS News investigation why so many rapists in this country are getting away with the crime. And Assignment America. They're ready to start their life together 50 years after a lie kept them apart.
Like the time had not passed. It was amazing.
This is the CBS Evening News with Katie Couric.
And good evening, everyone. He was initially counted among the dead in the massacre at Fort Hood, but today hospital officials said the Army psychiatrist accused of killing 12 soldiers and a civilian is now well enough to sit up and talk. And investigators have a lot of questions for Major Nidal Malik Hasan. Sources say the FBI has now identified internet communications that link him to a radical Islamic cleric with ties to al-Qaeda. We have two reports tonight, beginning with Bob Orr in Washington.
The contacts began last winter with Hasan reaching out to Imam Anwar al-Awlaki, and the two traded messages over a number of months into the spring of this year. Sources say intelligence agencies collected the messages as part of a separate case and attached no significance to them at the time. The communications appeared to be benign, with Hasan asking for help on a research paper studying the effects of war on Muslim American soldiers, and Awlaki responding with spiritual guidance. Officials say there was no talk of terrorism, so no investigation was launched. But the communications now raise serious questions. Awlaki, who was once the imam at the Virginia mosque Hasan attended, is an influential voice, spewing anti-American rhetoric from his exile in Yemen. He had known connections with 3 of the 9/11 terrorists, and he's an ongoing inspiration for radicals. Today, on his website, Awlaki praised Hasan's rampage. Now investigators are looking for further evidence that Awlaki may have played a role in the Fort Hood attack. And while Hasan is still considered a lone wolf, it's now clear he has at least some connections to known extremists. Bob Orr, CBS News, Washington.
This is Dean Reynolds at Fort Hood.
8 more minutes.
As soldiers at the fort went back to being soldiers, ever more troubling evidence about the suspect in their midst lingers like gun smoke over a battlefield, and it's given rise to concerns about a backlash against the 2,000 Muslim soldiers in the Army.
I've asked the chain of command to make sure that we are giving them special attention to make sure that they are being given every consideration and that we are vigilant to any kind of reaction that might take place.
Major Nidal Malik Hasan is sitting up and talking now at the Brooke Army Medical Center in San Antonio, recovering from the shootout he allegedly started last Thursday. He's now retained an attorney.
The question of where he might get a fair trial, whether it's at Fort Hood or elsewhere, is still to be, determined.
Clearly stung by revelations that such an apparently troubled officer, an outspoken opponent of U.S. policy and adherent to radical Islam, was being sent to the war zone, the Army stressed today that it's looking at how this incident could have been prevented and identifying other troops who may need help in the future.
Hasan was a soldier, and we have other soldiers that might have some of the same stress and indicators that he has, and we have to look across our entire formation.
Tomorrow, President Obama will be here to attend a special memorial service for the victims. Also invited are their families and notably leaders of the local Islamic community. Katie?
Dean Reynolds reporting from Fort Hood tonight. Thank you, Dean. Major Hasan was about to be deployed to Afghanistan to help counsel soldiers in the war zone. And as Don Teague reports, 9 of the Fort Hood victims were also therapists, part of a unit that the military fears is already stretched entirely too thin.
Their mission was to help soldiers deal with the stress of war on the battlefield. Instead, they were attacked at home. 3 Army therapists were killed and 6 other members of a combat stress control team wounded in last week's rampage on Fort Hood. They were preparing to deploy to Afghanistan, the team's critical mission on hold for now.
We're taking a hard look at making sure that they have everything they need And again, they may be delayed in regard to additional personnel being brought in.
8 years of war has taken its toll across the military. Some 300,000 service members, nearly 1 out of 5 returning from Iraq and Afghanistan, report symptoms of post-traumatic stress disorder.
Corporal Nathan Hewitt, an Iraq War veteran who was wounded in last week's attack, says his commanders encourage returning veterans to get help.
They tell their soldiers all the time, hey, if you have problems like this, go see the psychiatrist or go see, mental health.
But experts say finding enough qualified counselors is a challenge.
It's the face-to-face counseling that's so important for preventing and treating PTSD.
The Army has just over 400 psychiatrists to treat nearly 550,000 active duty soldiers, but is also developing alternatives, like the newly opened Resiliency Campus at Fort Hood, a health spa of sorts. The Army is hoping by taking the stigma away from getting mental help, more soldiers will seek it. Don Teague, CBS News, Fort Hood, Texas.
Turning now to the road ahead in Afghanistan. Tonight, after months of meetings with top advisors, President Obama has settled on a new strategy. Our David Martin has learned the president will send a lot more troops and plans to keep a large force there long term. Here's his exclusive report.
The president still has more meetings scheduled on Afghanistan, but informed sources tell CBS News he intends to give General Stanley McChrystal most, if not all, the additional troops he is asking for. McChrystal wanted 40,000, and the president has tentatively decided to send 4 combat brigades plus thousands more support troops. A senior officer says that's close to what McChrystal asked for. All the president's military advisors have recommended sending more troops, but they also have warned that alone will not win the war unless Afghan President Karzai cleans up his government.
He's got to take concrete steps to eliminate corruption. That means that you have to rid yourself of those who are corrupt. You have to actually arrest and prosecute them.
The first combat troops would not arrive until early next year, and it would be the end of 2010 before they were all there. That makes this Afghanistan surge very different from the Iraq surge, in which 30,000 troops descended on Baghdad and the surrounding area in just 5 months. Fred Kagan of the American Enterprise Institute says a slow-motion surge will produce slow-motion results.
And if they're going to be sort of trickled in very slowly over the course of the year, then it's unlikely to have a very decisive impact in the course of 2010.
The buildup would be expected to last about 4 years until McChrystal completes his plan for doubling the size of the Afghan army and police force. Added to the 68,000 Americans already there, that means there would be 100,000 U.S. troops in Afghanistan by the end of the president's first term.
The president is not expected to announce his decision until after his trip to China, which ends the week before Thanksgiving, Katie.
All right, David Martin with an exclusive report tonight from the Pentagon. Thank you, David. Now to Iran, where today 3 Americans were charged with spying. Josh Fatal, Shane Bauer, and Sarah Shord, seen here in a home video, were arrested in late July after hiking into Iran from northern Iraq. Their families say they crossed the border by accident. Secretary of State Hillary Clinton said today Iran has no evidence to back up the spy charges. Meanwhile, back in this country, the Gulf Coast is bracing for Tropical Storm Ida tonight. Warnings are up in Louisiana, Mississippi, Alabama, and Florida. And nearly 30% of Gulf oil production has been shut down. Ida is expected to dump 8 inches of rain after making landfall overnight. Then she's expected to make a right turn over and head across the Florida Panhandle. In El Salvador over the weekend, rain from Ida sparked mudslides and flooding that killed 134 people. Up next, a CBS Evening News investigation. Why is crucial evidence in rape cases being ignored? Some say it's allowing rapists to go free. Now, a disturbing story about rape and the lack of follow-up in pursuing the attackers. 89,000 rapes were reported in America last year, a frightening number made worse by the fact that additionally, an estimated 75,000 went unreported. And only 25% of reported rapes resulted in an arrest. Just as troubling is what's been happening to those victims who do come forward to report the crime. Tonight, Chief Investigative Correspondent Armen Keteyian has this exclusive report.
Valerie Newman says she never expected her 21st birthday to end in rape.
He stuck his hands down the sweatpants and was touching me and up like my shirt as well. And so I kept telling him no.
It started at this bowling alley in Erlanger, Kentucky. A man she just met, a friend of a friend, buying her drink after drink. Later that night, she threw up and passed out. Then, Valerie says, it happened.
When I woke up the next morning, my panties and the sweatpants were down around my ankles and my bra was undone.
Valerie said she realized she was raped, reporting it the next day, a classic charge of acquaintance rape. Nearly 3 years later, still no arrest in the case.
I almost feel like they're calling me a liar, like that they don't believe me.
The fact is, rape in this country is surprisingly easy to get away with. An arrest rate last year of just 25%, a fraction of the rate for murder and aggravated assault.
But when we have talked to victims, they very much so doubt whether or not it was worth it for them to go to the police. They're incredibly disillusioned with the criminal justice system.
The suspect's attorney told police his client never had sex with Valerie, yet an exam revealed evidence of forced sexual penetration, semen found on her underwear. Nurses took a rape kit, a collection of swabs and clothing that provide DNA evidence. The suspect provided a sample, but the DNA was never tested.
Testing the kit is one way to affirm a victim's story and again discredit the suspect's story.
Now a 5-month CBS News investigation has found a staggering number of rape kits that could contain incriminating DNA evidence have never been sent to crime labs for testing. At least 20,000 untested kits we found. 5,600 in Detroit, 3,800 in Houston, 5,100 in San Antonio, 1,100 in Albuquerque, many untested for years. And at least 12 major American cities from San Diego to Jacksonville said they have no idea how many rape kits in storage are untested. Police departments told us rape kits don't get tested due to cost, up to $1,500 a kit, a decision not to prosecute, and victims who recant or are unwilling to move forward with a case. Psychologist David Lesak from the University of Massachusetts has spent 20 years studying the minds of rapists.
Somehow, all we can do is take the statement from the victim, take the statement from the alleged perpetrator, and then throw up our hands because, you know, they're saying conflicting things and we don't know how to resolve this. That's not how we investigate other crimes.
Valerie was told her rape kit wasn't tested because it was too expensive.
I'm Armen Keteyian, CBS News.
But when we caught up with County Prosecutor Rob Sanders,
why wasn't the rape kit tested in the Valerie Newman case?
He told us something else.
The results of the rape test, the results of the DNA test would not have made the case one way or the other.
Sanders said his office made a judgment call the case was unwinnable in court, claiming there were issues with Valerie's memory and the alcohol involved. A practice, says Lesak, that often plays right into the hands of rapists.
Predators look for vulnerable people, and they prey on vulnerable people. And if, as a criminal justice system, we're going to essentially turn away from any victim who was drinking or any victim who was in some way vulnerable, we're essentially giving a free pass to sexual predators.
But in cities like New York, prosecutors decided no more free passes for alleged rapists, even in cases of acquaintance rape, testing every kit.
We store the rape kits.
Over 1,300 last year alone. Why test all the rape kits?
Because you never know what you find.
What New York found was stunning. Today, the city's arrest rate for rape is 70%, nearly triple the national average.
They didn't do their job to protect me and to protect everyone else. I don't think it's something I'll ever forget. I don't think it's something you can forget.
Valerie is not alone in her frustration. Tomorrow, our investigation will show that even when these kits do get tested, it may be too late to catch repeat offenders in time. Armen Keteyian, CBS News, New York.
If you or someone you know is a victim of rape, help is available. We have a list of resources on our website. Just go to cbsnews.com. Now to some important news for parents. One of the most popular baby strollers is being recalled. McLaren is recalling about 1 million umbrella strollers, every model that's been sold in the U.S. in the last 10 years. Officials say when the strollers are unfolded, the side hinges can pinch a child's finger, and several children have actually lost fingertips. McLaren will give owners a protective cover to put over the hinges. And coming up, Berlin's 20 years of freedom, a country and a family remember the day the wall came down. This was a day to celebrate in Berlin on the 20th anniversary of the fall of the Berlin Wall. German Chancellor Angela Merkel, who grew up in East Germany, joined former Soviet leader Mikhail Gorbachev to retrace her 1989 trip from East to West Berlin. Later, a row of giant dominoes was toppled along the former location of the wall. As Mark Phillips reports, it wasn't just a country that came together 20 years ago. Families did as well.
The official commemorations were big and loud. The private celebrations were small and heartfelt, none more so than the reunion of the Zoderman sisters, Jutta and Erika's daughter Sandra. The family was reunited that night 20 years ago on a Berlin train station platform, just as they were again on this anniversary. Erika, pregnant with Sandra, had fled to the West 8 years before the wall fell, smuggled out in the trunk of a diplomat's car. She didn't think she'd ever see her family again. But on the night the East German crowds surged through the wall, Jutta came and met Erika at that West German train station. Did you feel nervous or anxious? Yeah, very nervous. The family, like the country, was back together. Now when you think back on it,
Wenn du jetzt zurückdenkst, wie siehst du das?
do you think you made the right decision?
Hast du die richtige Entscheidung getroffen? 100%.
100%.
100%.
Erika found work and raised Sandra, who now has a career as a graphic artist. She had opportunities that 20 years later, school kids in Eastern Germany are only now beginning to enjoy. After unification, East German industry collapsed. More than 1 million people have moved west looking for work.
And there we have the state. So
and in the eastern town of Halle, the kids still wonder if they too will have to follow the money and leave.
All the doctors go to Western Germany because they get more wages there. And yes, I would do the same.
Sandra Zoderman has a lot to thank her mother for. So you feel she did you a pretty big favor?
Yeah.
The favor of a better life. Mark Phillips, CBS News, Berlin.
And up next, they were separated for 50 years because of a lie. The happy ending to this story in Assignment America. And finally tonight, a tale of love lost and found. It's proof that true love can feel like new love, even when it's a half-century old. Here's Steve Hartman with tonight's Assignment America.
It's been 50 years since Rodney Day first gave his class ring to Diane Harris.
We probably would have gotten married, and we would have stayed together.
They attended Napa High School in Northern California. Rodney was 3 years older, and after graduation, he joined the Navy. Diane used to wait for his letters and couldn't wait for him to get home on his first leave.
He was home only one day, and we went out, and he fell asleep at the wheel, and we crashed into a cement abutment.
Rodney didn't die, although as far as Diane was concerned, he might as well have, the rotten bum. Shortly after the accident, Diane says her mother came into the hospital room and said Rodney wanted to break up.
He just, left me.
Without even telling you to your face.
Yeah, I never saw him again, ever.
End of story. Or at least it was.
When did you find out the truth?
50 years later.
This is Rodney Day today. A few months ago, he contacted Diane, and as they talked, they realized what actually happened all those years ago.
You did not break up with her?
No, I did not.
You never talked to her mother?
No.
And I said, well, that's funny because she told me you wanted to break up with me.
And I was told by her mother that she said that.
Apparently, Diane's mother didn't want her daughter waiting around on some Navy guy.
She really altered history.
Yeah, she did. She definitely did.
Rodney and Diane both married other people. Rodney's wife died just a few years ago, and Diane is divorced. They both had children and grandchildren, so of course, neither would change the past. But neither wants to live in it either.
It was like a spark was there, like the time had not passed.
After about a month getting reacquainted, Rodney gave Diane his high school ring for the second time.
And what did he say?
Would you go steady again?
And just a few weeks later, gave her a new one to go with it. They are now Mr. and Mrs. Rodney Day. Like any newlyweds, they still have to meld her stuff with his.
That looks pretty old.
But assuming their marriage can survive the cupboards, they should enjoy many years of wedded bliss.
You should be green, honey, not brown.
I've looked for you.
Nice to see, huh? That young love doesn't have to get old.
As for Diane's mom, she's still alive and she actually likes her daughter's new beau, mostly because her daughter has yet to tell her who he really is.
I'd be really annoyed at her, but
Yeah,
I guess they
they've
don't want to
both
live in the
forgiven her.
past.
Yeah.
And she's probably pretty old by now.
She's getting up there.
All right, well, tell us about next
Okay.
week.
All right, next week. Imagine building your own 747, one scrap piece at a time. You'll meet the man well on his way to doing just that next week.
Steve, thanks. And that's the CBS Evening News for tonight. I'm Katie Couric. Good night.
That's a pretty yarn.